Here's the first thing the Stoics understood that modern people don't. A thought appearing in your mind does not make it yours. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But what most people skip past is the word power. He wasn't saying control your thoughts by forcing them out. He was saying you have the power to refuse them citizenship in your identity. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, a man who started life as a literal slave, whose master broke his leg just to prove a point, built his entire philosophy on this one idea. There are things within your control, your judgments, your choices, your responses, and there are things outside your control, everything else. The overthinking spiral always begins when you try to mentally solve problems that live in the second category. Modern research backs this completely. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that the act of labeling a thought, literally saying, "This is a thought, not a fact," reduces emotional intensity in the amygdala by up to 50%. Therapists call this cognitive diffusion. The Stoics called it hegemonikan, the ruling faculty. The idea is the same: you are not your thoughts, you are the one watching them. Here's how you apply this immediately. The next time an anxious thought surfaces, don't fight it. Don't try to logic your way through it. Just say out loud if needed, "I notice I am having the thought that," and then complete the sentence. "I notice I am having the thought that I said the wrong thing in that meeting." That tiny linguistic shift creates distance. Distance kills the spiral. You go from being inside the thought to standing outside it, observing it. That's the first Stoic move, and it takes about 3 seconds. Use it every time. This one sounds counterintuitive. Most people think the solution to overthinking is to stop imagining bad outcomes. The Stoics believed the exact opposite: premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning, Seneca, a man who tutored emperors and survived political exile, would deliberately imagine the worst things that could happen that day. His money gone, his reputation destroyed, his health failing, his friends betraying him, not to spiral into anxiety, but to diffuse the power those fears had over him before they even had a chance to strike. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who craves more." The fear of losing something you haven't lost yet is the engine of overthinking. The Stoics surgically removed that engine by facing the feared outcome head-on in controlled conditions. Modern research calls this defensive pessimism, and psychologist Julie Norham at Wellesley College has spent decades studying it. Her findings: certain people perform significantly better when they imagine failure in advance rather than using positive visualization. Why? Because the brain that has already processed the worst-case scenario doesn't waste processing power fearing it. The loop breaks. The key distinction here is this, and this is what separates Stoic thinking from catastrophizing. You imagine the worst, you accept it as survivable or even manageable, and then you let it go. You don't live in the worst case. You visit it, strip its power, and return. Seneca described this as touching bottom. Once you felt what's there, you're not afraid to fall anymore. Practical application: take the thing that's causing your current overthinking spiral. Whatever it is, the conversation, the decision, the relationship, the career move. Write down the actual worst outcome. Be specific. Then write down one thing you would do if that happened. Just one. The moment your brain has a response to the worst case, the loop loses its grip. Overthinking thrives on unresolved threat. Resolve the threat, even hypothetically, and the thinking stops. Overthinking has a time signature. It almost never happens in the present. It happens in the future. What if this goes wrong? Or in the past, why did I say that? The present moment is overthinking's only weakness. Marcus Aurelius, who had more legitimate reasons to worry about the future than almost any human in history, running a 2 million-person empire while fighting a plague and a war simultaneously, wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, not try to stay present, not breathe deeply and appreciate now. Confine yourself." It was an act of mental discipline, not relaxation. The Stoic concept of amor fati, love of fate, goes even further. Epictetus taught that resistance to the present moment is the root of all mental suffering. When you're spinning scenarios about what might happen, what should have happened, or what you wish were different, you are by definition not dealing with reality. You are in conflict with what is, and that conflict is where overthinking lives. Here's a real behavioral study that confirms this. Harvard psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert ran a study tracking 2,250 adults throughout their daily lives using a smartphone app. The finding: people spent 46.9% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they were currently doing. And critically, they were less happy when their minds wandered, regardless of what they were actually doing. Presence isn't just a philosophy, it's a measurable predictor of well-being. The Stoic anchor technique is this. When you catch yourself looping, ask one question. What is actually happening right now in this room, in this moment? Not what might happen, not what did happen. What is actually happening? List 3 things you can see, feel the floor under your feet. Your nervous system cannot sustain the threat response of overthinking when you are genuinely, physically grounded in the present. The spiral needs abstraction to survive. Take it away. Overthinking compounds. One unprocessed thought becomes 3, 3 become 10. By the time you're lying awake at 2 a.m., you're not dealing with today's problems, you're dealing with a month of unprocessed cognitive debt. The Stoics knew this, and they had a specific practice to prevent it. Seneca described it in his letters to Lucilius. Every evening before sleep, he would conduct a private trial of his own mind. 3 questions. What did I do wrong today? What did I do right? What could I have done better? He wasn't flagellating himself. He wasn't performing self-criticism. He was filing the day, categorizing it, learning from it, and then closing it. Pythagoras reportedly used the same practice centuries earlier. Never let sleep come upon your mild eyes before you have reviewed each action of the day 3 times. Where did I go wrong? What did I accomplish? What duty was left undone? This wasn't guilt. It was accounting. You can't close a tab you haven't opened. Most people go to sleep with 40 tabs open, then wonder why their mind won't stop running at 3 a.m. Psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas has run dozens of studies on expressive writing, the practice of writing out your thoughts and feelings in detail. Across his research, people who journaled about stressful events showed lower cortisol levels, fewer intrusive thoughts, and better immune function compared to control groups. The act of writing doesn't just record thoughts. It completes them. Your brain stops looping on a thought when it believes the thought has been processed. Your version of this: 5 minutes every night, no screens, 3 lines minimum. What happened? What you made it mean? What you're letting go of? That's it. Not a diary entry, not a therapy session. A mental filing system. When the day is filed, the mind can rest. When the mind can rest, the overthinking that attacks in quiet moments loses its primary feeding window. The Stoics had a concept they called the sage, an idealized inner version of yourself who sees clearly without emotional distortion. When Epictetus was teaching in his school in Nicopolis, he would instruct his students to imagine watching themselves from the outside. Not to judge, not to criticize, simply to observe the way you'd watch a stranger on the street. This is the psychological technique modern therapists now call self-distancing, and Columbia University psychologist Ethan Kross has done extensive research on it. In one landmark study, participants who reflected on their problems using their own name, "Why is David feeling this way?" rather than "Why am I feeling this way?" showed significantly reduced emotional reactivity, better problem-solving, and lower cortisol response. The simple act of referring to yourself in the third person activates the same neural mechanism the Stoics were training with the sage concept. This move is subtle but devastating to overthinking. When you are inside your thoughts, you experience them as reality. When you observe your thoughts from the outside, you experience them as events, things happening in a mind you are watching, not a world you are trapped in. The spiral requires you to be fully immersed. The observer self refuses immersion. Here's the practice. When you catch yourself overthinking, use your own name, not "I'm worrying about this." Say your actual name. Is worrying about this right now? What does actually need in this moment? It sounds almost absurd. It works immediately. The shift from first-person to third-person perspective is one of the fastest ways to interrupt the emotional hijacking that sustains overthinking. The Stoics designed a version of this 2,000 years ago. Modern neuroscience caught up to explain why. There is a common misunderstanding about Stoicism that keeps people stuck. People hear, "Accept what you cannot control," and they interpret it as passivity, as surrender, as a sophisticated way of doing nothing. This is the opposite of what Stoicism actually teaches. Marcus Aurelius didn't write the Meditations while sitting in a garden contemplating tranquility. He wrote them on military campaign in a tent between battles during a plague that was killing thousands of his citizens. He was the most active emperor Rome had seen in decades. Epictetus, despite living in poverty and disability, ran a thriving school and produced students who changed Roman intellectual history. The Stoics were not observers. They were actors. The principle is this: you accept what you cannot change, and then you move on what you can. The problem with overthinking is that it creates the illusion of mental action while producing zero real-world motion. You feel like you're working on the problem because your mind is occupied with it, but no output is being generated. The Stoics call this distinction praxis, meaningful action, versus kinesis, mere movement without purpose. Behavioral psychology confirms the cure. A concept called behavioral activation, the bedrock of cognitive behavioral therapy for depression and anxiety, is built on exactly this principle. When you feel stuck, you don't wait for motivation or clarity. You take the smallest possible action in the direction of what matters, not the perfect action, the available action. A 2020 meta-analysis in psychological medicine found that behavioral activation was as effective as full CBT programs for reducing rumination and anxiety. Movement interrupts the loop. The Stoic prescription is blunt. Identify one thing you can actually do about the thing you're overthinking. One specific, physical, completable action. Send the message. Make the call. Write the first sentence. Close the browser tab. Whatever it is, do it now before this video ends. The brain cannot sustain an anxiety loop about a problem it has already begun solving. Action is not the reward for clarity. Action produces clarity. This is the one that changes everything. And it's the one most people aren't ready to use. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. The Stoics didn't say this to be dark. They said it as a cognitive instrument, the sharpest tool in the philosophical kit for cutting through trivial fear and pointless suffering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly." He also wrote, "How many a Chrysippus, how many a Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time already swallowed up?" These were not morbid men. They were men who used the reality of death to achieve something the rest of us struggle with our entire lives. Perspective. Here's the test. Whatever you're currently overthinking, the mistake, the embarrassment, the uncertain outcome, the opinion someone has of you, ask yourself this. Will this matter in 10 years? Will you even remember it? If you knew you had 6 months left, would this thought be worth a single minute of your mental real estate? Psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia calls this the psychological immune system, our mind's capacity to adapt to and recover from almost anything that actually happens to us. We dramatically overestimate how long negative outcomes will affect us. The thing you're torturing yourself over mentally. If it actually happened, the rejection, the failure, the loss, research consistently shows you would adapt faster than you think. The suffering you're doing in your head is worse than the actual event would be. Jeff Bezos developed a personal decision-making framework he calls the regret minimization framework. He asks himself which choice he would regret less when he's 80 years old, looking back. It's a secular version of memento mori. When you zoom out to the scale of a life, the spiral collapses under the weight of its own insignificance. Use it. Whatever is looping in your mind right now, put your 80-year-old self in the room. What does that version of you think about this problem? What do they wish the current you had done instead of spinning? That answer is your next move. CTA, 30 seconds. If these 7 moves hit different, if somewhere in this video you recognized a pattern in yourself that you're ready to break, then you're exactly who this channel was built for. Every week we go deeper into the psychology of self-mastery, what the Stoics actually taught, what modern science confirms, and what you can do today to think sharper, act faster, and stop letting your own mind work against you. Hit subscribe. It costs you nothing. And the next video might be the one that changes how you operate permanently. Outro, 30-45 seconds. Here's the final thought. Overthinking is not a personality flaw. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a survival mechanism running on outdated hardware, a mind built for physical threats trying to solve social and psychological ones. The Stoics understood this before neuroscience had the language for it. And their solution wasn't to silence the mind. It was to train it. You now have 7 moves: the separation, the worst-case weapon, the present anchor, the evening audit, the observer self, the action cure, and memento mori. Don't try to use all 7 tomorrow. Pick one. The one that felt most true to what you're going through right now. Apply it for 3 days, then add another. The Stoics didn't build iron minds overnight. They built them one practice thought at a time. Your mind is either your greatest tool or your worst enemy. Today, you choose which. Are you trapped in an endless loop of overthinking? Stoicism has the answer, not feel-good advice, but 7 ruthless mental moves used by Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus to silence the spiral before it takes over. In this video, we break down the ancient Stoic techniques that modern psychology now confirms. The dichotomy of control, premeditatio malorum, behavioral activation, and the death lens that makes every problem shrink instantly. These aren't theories. They're actionable practices you can use today to stop anxiety, kill rumination, and take back control of your mind. Whether you're dealing with decision paralysis, social anxiety, or relentless mental noise, this Stoic discipline guide will rewire how you think. Subscribe for weekly Stoicism, dark psychology, and Sigma mindset content that actually changes how you operate. Stoicism Overthinking Mindset.